Hi, this is Polyfragmented Sunday for the Plural Acceptance Week. Yesterday was Plural Pride and we had so much fun. My name is Sarah Clark. I am a polyfragmented DID system and we live in the Netherlands.
And hi, I'm Laura. I'm from the Elephant Journal System. I'm from Australia and I have DID as well. In the book Clinical Perspectives on MPD, we read that, which is now called DID, became known as multiple personality disorder with the release of the DSM-3 in the 1980, until the name changed to dissociative identity disorder in the 1990s. During this time, polyfragmented DID was referred to as complex multiple personality disorder, and this is from Kluft. It's interesting to note now, though, there is no such thing called DID that is complex DID in the modern age.
Yes, that is interesting. Wonder how that happened. People in the plural community generally agree about these definitions when it comes to polyfragmented systems. When there are more than 100 alters, or when the system or inner world consists out of layers, clusters, or subsystems, or when alters have DID or their own systems, sometimes also called subsystems, or systems that identify as polyfragmented for different reasons.
So we're going to do a bit of an interview today since we have our very own polyfragmented system here. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
So, how many alters do you have in your system, Sarah?
A lot. We have around 500 alters that we know. Not know, because it's really difficult to know 500 people very well.
How do you count them?
Well, we have, yeah, kind of. We have every subsystem in our system has their own representative, and that person keeps count. And so then we bring those numbers to the big table and count them up. So that's how we get to 500. But I personally, as Sarah Clark, don't know every 500 of them. And then we also know that outside of that, there are still worlds that we have no access to, as far as we know. And so we know there are people there, but we don't know those people yet. Mm-hmm. So we can also not count them.
500 plus it is. So when you were diagnosed, did you know that you were polyfragmented then? Did the doctor tell you?
No, absolutely not. We thought we had 12 alters. We also thought that was the amount of alters we had. We didn't know that alters could still show up later. And so it was quite a shock when more alters came, and that kept happening and happening and happening. And at first it was like maybe 2 or 3 new alters showed up, or not new. They were always there, but we were not consciously aware of each other. And then we became consciously aware of each other. And so it was 2 or 3 alters at the time. And then a few years later, we would meet 20 or 30 or even 200 people at the same time. And at first, we thought we are so destabilized. We're not doing okay. Like, this is not good at all. Yeah. And now we realize that actually, at first, we were only able to handle 2 or 3 new parts at a time. But because we got used to it and we healed ourselves and we listened to each other, we built trust in our system, we now were able to receive 20 or 30 parts at once. Yeah. And so actually was progress.
How does someone become polyfragmented?
It's not really clear how people become polyfragmented when we look at the clinical models. Also from the work from the 80s, there's not that much that explains why or how it happens. And if it does, then it says that alters are split off into their own subsystems. But if we look at the theory of structural dissociation, or even that concept was made up a long time before that, but they say that we were not born as a set-in-stone personality and split off, but instead we are born as babies with ego states and we're unable to integrate into one full person because trauma interrupted that process.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So then if you look at the dissociative spectrum, you've got the polyfragmented right up the top end. Does that mean that you need to have more trauma to be a polyfragmented system?
No, I don't think so. First of all, that's trauma weighing. But also, I think it's more so that you experience trauma in different areas of your life where you have to respond in a different way to different situations.
Okay. What do you mean different situations?
So if you get abused at home, you have to respond different than when you get bullied in school by kids, right? So
Yeah, that makes sense.
you need a different kind of person to deal with that situation, and so that might be a way how we end up polyfragmented.
Okay. So then how did you find out more information about being polyfragmented?
Well, it was really difficult at first to find information online. There's very limited information available. If there is information, it's either a very generic overview of the four things we just mentioned, right? More than 100 alters, clusters, or layers, or
Yeah.
yeah, those things. And so, next to that, there are stories of survivors who explain how things work in their system or in their inner world, and that has helped us a lot. And there is a website called rainfo.org, and that's also a great place to find information. And eventually, luckily, I ended up with a therapist who could explain me more about it.
Okay. All right. Okay. So did you have any communication tips for polyfragmented systems?
Yes, my best communication tip is to work with representatives of different subsystems because it makes communication a lot more fluid inside. It's just organization wise a lot easier to work with representatives. So that's my tip that I want to give here. And then we have a video with 11 tips for internal communication on our Power to the Plurals YouTube channel that I highly recommend for other communication tips.
Awesome. How did you nominate people, alters, to come and be representative of the subsystem? How did that happen?
When we meet a new subsystem, we ask them who their representative is or who wants to be. And if they don't have someone, that subsystem votes to see who should be the representative.
Oh, okay. That's very cool. Very cool. So there's two different types of SRA, or maybe not two different types, but the S can sometimes stand for two different things. Could you explain that a bit further?
SRA stands for Satanic Ritual Abuse. Some people seem to think that it stands for spiritual ritual abuse. And Gene Reisman explained it as every satanic abuse is spiritual, but not every spiritual abuse is satanic. And I think that sums it up best. And in the interview with Gene Reisman, we said that it would be best to keep the S for satanic because RA is already inclusive of spiritual ritual abuse.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's been some documents released by the US government that do they correlate at all to the SRA? Classified some documents?
Yes, they declassified some documents that give us insight in certain government projects that the United States participated in. But it does not necessarily confirm SRA, as they do not describe it as SRA. They do not use the term SRA.
Okay, there's definitely people who have identified as being polyfragmented from these programs that the government ran.
Yes. Yes, there have been people who have reported that for sure. We met a few of them in Orlando at the conference during a SRA survivors lunch. So even though the documents do not say that or mention SRA, we do know from survivor testimonies that the projects and the experiments included SRA. So it does not say that in the
Result.
evidence that they released, but we do know it from survivor stories.
Okay. Bit of a change to subject, but why are some of children's stories triggers for the SRA community?
Well, it's kind of the same topic, I guess. Not very different.
Little sidestep. That's just
right.
Yeah.
So some people believe that these movies were created with the intent to use them for these projects or experiments or SRA. I think that these videos were created and then the SRA abusers, to call it that, use these videos for their experiments and their projects. I think it also varies which movie you talk about. There's a lot of different movies, and it's a very tricky topic because it's very It varies per system, but we see so much overlap that it's really kind of freaky sometimes to hear that that also triggers other people.
Yeah. Yeah. And so these are like pre-noughties movies, yeah?
Sorry, what?
And they're early on movies. They're not latest movies, not something that's been released in the last 20 years or 10 years.
Right. Yeah. Not that we know of, because
Yeah.
obviously we are adults right now. So we don't know at the moment which movies are used for what.
Yeah, but
Um,
there's definitely recaps and whatnot, so they would still be triggering as well.
yes. But also, we see people analyzing newer movies and saying they could use them for the same purpose.
That all makes sense, yeah. So, what do you call, or how do you name your alters? So, how did they come to have names in your own system?
Well, some of our alters just had their name. And we also have alters who were named in the cult we were part of. And so they got a name there.
Yeah, so
And
abusers gave you the name? Is that what you're saying?
yeah,
Yeah.
basically, yeah.
And they programmed in alters.
Yes, we are indeed a survivor of that kind of abuse where they have deliberately created alters through trauma, and also programmed those alters to do specific tasks, for example, and that came with a name. Many of us have changed our name to something completely different or slightly different.
All right. And how does integration work when it comes to someone who is polyfragmented?
Right. So we know from studies that only 12.8% of people are able to fully integrate in that follow-up study that was 6 years long. It doesn't mention anything about polyfragmented systems, but I think it is possible for polyfragmented systems to downsize if they want to. I'm not sure how far it's realistic to integrate fully into one person, whatever
Yes.
that may mean. Um, but we do see that polyfragmented systems sometimes choose to integrate and downsize as much as possible, or I don't know if that's the right term, as much as possible, but they try to downgrade. And what we also see is that these sometimes these alters are more like fragments, and then when they come together, it's like they become an alter. That is not the right scientific way to explain it, but that's how we experienced it in our system.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Fragments coming together as a whole. Yeah.
right. Yeah.
All right. Well, we've got a little brief information here. So it says, in The Haunted Self, the book, it teaches us, in principle, the number of the parts of a personality in any given individual has little bearing on whether dissociation is at the secondary or the tertiary level. A patient with secondary structural dissociation may have EPs, which are emotional parts, while the patient with tertiary structural dissociation may have two ANPs, which is apparently normal parts, and two EPs, emotional parts. However, in general, more divisions relate to less mental efficiency and more likely that the traumatized individual will have tertiary structural dissociation. That's from Onno Hart.
Onno van der Hart.
Yeah, you can say Dutch it away.
Yes.
The accent makes it
Yeah.
much more authentic.
So they are basically saying, so let's say that secondary structural dissociation stands for borderline personality disorder in this example, right?
Yeah.
And DID at the other end. So they are saying that you might have more emotional parts when you have borderline personality disorder than when you have dissociative identity disorder.
Yeah.
And then the second part they are explaining is that, however, in general, more division relates to less mental efficiency and more likelihood that a traumatized individual will have DID.
Yeah,
Basically.
tertiary. So,
Yes.
I mean, so that really does put into the notion that some people call DID complex BPD.
Right.
But that's not correct because we're talking about multiple apparently normal parts. I don't really like that term, sorry. But in BPD, it's not a tertiary split. You don't have multiple ANPs. You just have the one ANP and multiple EPs.
Right. Yeah. It's also interesting to note that there was nothing else in the hunt itself on polyfragmented systems.
No. It's very difficult to find information out there.
Yes.
We even had to go before we tried to do this video to try and see if we can get a definition, and that's really based off the community and not off what anyone who holds a piece of paper says, because they don't recognize it really.
Yeah.
The 80s.
Yes.
So you guys are still, you exist, you know? You still see them.
Yeah. Yes. One person who does address us is Alison Miller. And she teaches us in her book, Healing the Unimaginable, that a large number of alters results in less obvious physical signs of switching. So if you are polyfragmented, then it might be that your DID is even more covert than someone who is not polyfragmented.
That is really interesting to know. And I think knowing a polyfragmented person as well, not just yourself, was one of the titles that I kind of picked up on. So I can understand almost from a clinical perspective how people can't tell when we are so covert or when you are so covert. Yeah.
Right.
Polyfragmented, extra covert. So Jean Reisman, we love our Jean Reisman. She says that parts can be arranged in layers throughout the system, generally isolated and not in communication with other parts of the system.
Right.
Yeah.
So from community feedback, it seems as if most often parts are able to communicate with parts in their own subsystem, but not with parts from other subsystems. This is also the case in my own system. And so I like Jean, her quote, but I think it's a little bit different.
How so?
Because Jean says they are unable to communicate with other parts of the system as a whole. Whereas I think from community feedback and in my own system that we can communicate with people in our own subsystem, but not with people in another subsystem in our own system.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. Shall we talk about some of the major issues that are facing the polyfragmented community?
Yes, let's do it.
One thing, the internet says that you don't exist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Yes. There is extremely limited research and information for polyfragmented systems. Most information that we could find was from other plurals sharing their personal experiences.
So I did touch on it earlier, but the term went out of popular use in the late 80s and the early 90s, even before multiple personality disorder had become a diagnosis and had become DID.
It was used before the internet was a popular source of information.
Yeah, so that was talking about that we can't. The major issues is that everyone who was talking about polyfragmented systems now haven't put the information online because it was not the internet wasn't as easily accessible.
Exactly.
Yeah. Within the community, it was more face-to-face meetings.
Yes. Yeah. There were a lot of meetings back in the day for SRA survivors. Jean spoke on this. She said there was a meeting every week back in the early 90s.
Twice a week, actually, didn't she?
Maybe, maybe even twice a week. And there's nothing right now.
No. So the other thing is it's not talked about or known in the media. It's not even stereotyped like DID is. So, I mean, literally people have no idea that systems so large exist.
And there's a vast difference if you have 5 alters or 500. And this should also be reflected in treatment guidelines. But it seems as if complex and or polyfragmented forms of plurality were erased from the clinical world.
Yeah, it really makes it difficult, especially when you're trying to get help for complex trauma. But as we know from other talks, getting help for any complex trauma is pretty difficult. There's not a lot of good training out there. Yeah. So we also have, as with having so many alters, the chances of having a higher chance of non-human alters, fictive, factive alters. There's a higher rate of suicide, time loss. There's amnesic barriers between systems, and none of these are addressed in treatment.
Due to possible correlation with SRA, not many systems are willing to present themselves to the public for fear of past abusers or cults relocating past members.
Yeah, so we have no one leading the way apart, there's only a certain few. That makes it really hard. Reciprocally from the community, though, there's also backlash of people being validated, and many polyfragmented systems fear that backlash from their own community. They're not accepted, not believed that they're polyfragmented.
Yeah. Or people ask questions like, how's that even possible? How do you keep track? It's kind of offensive because it's none of their business, really. So you want to talk a little bit about the latest news in the polyfragmented part of our Plural umbrella community?
I definitely do. I mean, and since it's from Australia, the first one, I'm happy to talk about it. So you may have heard of Jenny Haynes. She's a polyfragmented system that has over 2,500 personalities, alters. She's from Australia, yay. She was able to testify against her father with the help of, I think it was 6 of alters that she said that got up on the stand, and they were able to recount their part of the story of the abuse that was inflicted upon them. And so that trial is still going on. But it's really encouraging that the legal systems now in Australia and hopefully the world is starting to recognise that the validation that we hold memories from the past. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Very exciting. And I can't wait to see how this story develops.
Definitely. Got any other news for us, Sarah?
Yes. The other thing is that Jean Reisman from rainfo.org gave her very first interview. She was the very first website on the internet for SRA survivors and RA survivors. And they gave their very first interview on camera for the Plural Positivity World Conference 2019, which you can watch back on youtube.com/plural events, but you're already on the channel.
Hopefully. Beautiful. So, what does this community want the world to know, and what education and acceptance would you like to see in the future?
I wrote it down so I don't forget it. We want to be addressed in the ISSTD treatment guidelines for adults. It is not realistic that you treat someone with 5 alters the same way as you treat someone with 500 alters. We also want more research into functional multiplicity, as integration is only reached by 12.8% in a 6-year follow-up study. It is not mentioned if any of the participants were polyfragmented. We need the clinical community to get over the satanic panic already. It's been 25 years at least. We have the right to be heard, believed, and receive good treatment that suits our specific needs as polyfragmented and/or SRA survivors. We also hope that the people within the Plural community keep our needs in mind, including the language they might use, which might trigger certain survivors.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I'd love all those things as well. Yeah.
Right?
100%. Yeah. Tick, tick, tick. We can only hope. We can only hope. One video at a time to get closer, I hope.
Well, we're not just hoping, though. We're also working super, super hard, right?
We are. And there's that petition going out at the moment as well, trying to get the ISTD to update their guidelines because they're over 10 years old.
Yes, I really hope that gets a lot more signatures. We will put the link down below in the description for everyone if you want to sign the petition for better treatment.
I'm not fluffy purple anymore, but I am still wearing purple for Plural Acceptance Week.
Right? But I'm still wearing my socks inside out.
Yep, got to get to 1,000. Got to get to 1,000 before we can change.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It was great.
The pleasure was mine. I'll say goodbye from Australia.
I'll say goodbye from the Netherlands.
Okay, I'll see you.
Bye.
Bye.